Good evening, this is Resonance104.4 FM or resonance.fm.com. The name of this show is Hooting Yard on the Air, written and presented by Frank Key and sound engineered by Johnny Seven. And this week I'd like to talk to you primarily about swans. I was walking along the towpath of the old canal when suddenly, and out of nowhere, a maddened swan came flapping at me in stormy rage and thumped me so hard with its wing that it broke my arm. "Confound you, swan!" I cried in my distress, but the swan had already returned to the canal, gliding through the water, a vision of elegance. By one of those curious coincidences with which my life is stippled, the physician who tended to my fractured bone at the canalside clinic was called Dr Swanfracture. "I suppose you must have to set quite a few bones broken by swans," I said, through the haze of anaesthetic with which I had been unnecessarily injected. "Actually, you're the first such patient I have had to attend to in 20 years of practice at this clinic," said the doctor. "For the swans on this canal are known for their placidity. There is perhaps something in the canal water." Later, convalescing, shattered on an alpine balcony, I reflected on this, and my reflections were unhappy ones. If Dr Swanfracture was correct and the canal swans were placid, then what had I done to provoke one of them to such uncharacteristic violent frenzy? Or was it not something I had done, but simply me, my being, my essential self? Was I, without realising it, a danger to swans? A man can come undone when faced with such an uncomfortable truth about himself, and I did indeed come undone. I raved and spluttered and rolled about. It never occurred to me that Dr Swanfracture was talking through his hat. Many years passed, the majority of them spent trussed and medicated and bewildered in a series of lunatic asylums, before one day I was visited by an ornithologist. This saintly chap was convinced that the mad and the lunatic and the bewildered could be brought to their senses through a better appreciation of birds. He it was who enlightened me regarding the ineradicable savagery of swans. When I explained that there was something in the canal water that made placid the swans that glid therein, he laughed like a drain. When eventually his gurgling ceased, he said he had never heard such poppycock in his life. "There is no drug on earth," he said, "that could pacify a swan." Indeed, his own studies had shown that the only way to render a swan harmless was to wring its graceful neck. Dr Swanfracture's neck was anything but graceful. Rather, it was scrawny and bepimpled and wrinkled, as I learned when I clamped my hairy hands around it and wrung it, having stridden into the canalside clinic and through his waiting room, where sat several patients nursing swan-broken arms. This one isn't about swans. Puny neurasthenic Cadet Vig was on sentry duty outside Fort Hoyte, 4 points, when an angel of the Lord appeared unto him, 12 points. Cadet Vig trembled in terror, 2 points. Excuse me. The angel of the Lord appeared to be perplexed. It opened its ring binder and looked carefully at the weedy cadet, and then at its paperwork, and then at Cadet Vig again, and then back to its paperwork, and its brow furrowed. For the purposes of its earthly visitation, the angel had made use of a hole punch and inserted all his papers into the ring binder. Normally, when shimmering in its celestial halls, the angel had each individual sheet affixed to a wall with drawing pins, the mass of papers spread out for visual oomph, as is the practice with serial killers in television dramas. 6 points. "You are puny, neurasthenic, and outside a fort," said the angel. "It says here you should be stately, plump, and inside a martello tower." Cadet Vig did not know what to say in response, so he merely quaked. 2 points. "Well, never mind," said the angel, slamming shut the ring binder. "What fort is this?" "Fort Hoity," said Cadet Vig truthfully. The angel returned to its ring binder. 1 point. Rummaged through the papers, found the entry for Cadet Vig, and said, "According to my records, you are meant on this day, at this hour, to be on sentry duty at Fort Toity." 8 points. Cadet Vig was on the point of swooning. His legs turned to jelly as he realised that yet again he had misread the duty roster. Captain Nitty would be furious. 10 points. The milksop cadet had an awful vision of months stretching ahead doing potato peeling punishment. How long, he wondered, would it take him to cross the eerie marshes to Fort Toity? Could he get there before Captain Nitty discovered his mistake? He had a sudden bright idea. "Is it in your power," he asked the angel of the Lord, "to transport me instantaneously to the sentry post outside Fort Toity, far away across the eerie marshes, so I will not get into one of my pickles with Captain Nitty?" The angel once again considered the contents of its ring binder. 6 points. "Yes," it said eventually, "that is well within my power. But I am minded instead on this starry night to shower you, Cadet Vig, with teeming thousands, nay millions of points, more points than any cadet under Captain Nitty's command has ever been awarded." Now Cadet Vig did swoon. He crumpled to the ground next to the sentry box outside Fort Hoity. As he lay there, robbed of consciousness, innumerable golden shining points rained down upon him. And when he woke, the angel of the Lord had vanished, and stars glittered across the boundless firmament. And here, clanking towards him in full armour, came Captain Nitty, his face purple with rage, his eyes like burning coals. 2 points. And Cadet Vig, for the first time in his puny life, was not afraid. He cocked his blunderbuss and took aim at Captain Nitty. He had millions of points. This story has accumulated a total of 53 points, if I have tallied them correctly. A letter plops onto the mat from Tim Thurn. "Oi, Mr. Key, you seem to know an immense amount about birds, yet virtually nothing about fish. Is there any reason for this disparity? If so, I'm agog to know. Agog, I tell you. Passionately yours, Tim Thurn." Often with Tim's letters, I find the best thing to do is to ball them up in my fist, scrunch them a few times, and then deposit them in the wastepaper basket. Occasionally, after the scrunching, I drop them directly down a waste chute if, for example, the wastepaper basket is overflowing, as it sometimes is, or even if space remains in the wastepaper basket, I feel impelled to cast the letter as far from me as possible to obliterate it from my sight. There is always the possibility, you see, that if I put the scrunched letter into the wastepaper basket, I might, while it languishes there, hoik it out and unscrunch it and unball it up, if that's a phrase, and reread it. Once it's plunged down a waste chute, it's gone forever, of course, or at least its retrieval is made a matter of great complexity, necessitating the involvement of various municipal waste management personnel who may or may not demand bribes or other favours in order to send one of their number or some kind of scuttling robot down into the midden to rummage for Tim's scrunched letter. Usually when I discard Tim's letters so promptly, it's because they're annoying. He can be a very exasperating correspondent, and I think he takes a curious pride in being so. I may be wrong on that point, but I don't think I am. Some people gain a great deal of pleasure from being annoying, and Tim is one of them. I believe he sits there, wherever it is he lives, picturing in his mind's eye me, huffing and puffing, balling up and then scrunching his latest letter, tossing it into a wastepaper basket or down a waste chute, and then going to have a lie down in a darkened room to recover from the mental disturbance he has caused me. I, in my turn, lie there in the dark, picturing in my mind's eye Tim Thurn, chuckling or chortling or even guffawing fatuously as he imagines my irritation. I impute fatuity to his laughter because this makes it more vivid and hateful. Having no idea what Tim looks like, I have to rely on my imagination. Sometimes he is as thin as a rake, angular and seedy, with unseemly stains on his clothing. At other times he is a tubby kind of fellow, smug and goofy and seedy, with unseemly stains on his clothing. Once I was so damned livid after reading one of his letters that I decided to consult a graphologist who could, from Tim's handwriting, fashion a convincing portrait of him, the possession of which could help me visualise his despicable chuckling, chortling, guffawing fatuity all the more vividly. Unfortunately, Tim confounded me by typing his letters, which rather put paid to my plan. It would be wrong, however, to think that all of Tim's missives are equally annoying. Some of them are not annoying at all. Those ones I do not ball up and scrunch and dispose of, but instead lay out flat upon the blotting pad upon my desk, and I reread them carefully while composing in my head a reply. Such was the case with the one cited above regarding birds and fish. It was an unexceptionable, vaguely polite query, and I thought it deserving of a civil response. Of course, I didn't want to give anything away. I do not want Tim Thurn, or anyone else for that matter, peering into the innards of my head to see what lurks within. Whether or not I know the first thing about birds or fish is my business and nobody else's. So though it called for a polite response, I could not answer Tim's question directly. I would have had to craft my reply as carefully as I read and reread the letter, that is, very carefully indeed. Eventually, fueled by a slurp of Dr. Baxter's invigorating brain syrup, I worked out precisely what to write. First, though, I called on my priest to ascertain how many years I would have to languish in purgatory were I to be less than truthful, or, to put it bluntly, to tell a barefaced lie. Apprised of this information, which seemed not too onerous, I wrote, "Dear Mr. Thurn, thank you for your delightful and not at all annoying letter. I am afraid that somewhere on its journey between your postbox and my doormat, it was gnawed and nibbled by squirrels or some such small skittering mammals, and much of the content destroyed or rendered illegible. The only surviving text is an immense amount about birds and I am agog to know. Might I suggest that grammatically it would be better to place those phrases in reverse order? That being so, I would happily bombard you with whatever it is you wish to learn about, for example, swifts and swallows and geese and starlings and linnets and partridges and quail and woodpeckers and teal and pratincoles and thrushes and warblers and auks and guillemots and shearwaters and spoonbills and skuas and albatrosses and swans and pigeons and owls and penguins and rooks and crows and dunnocks and albino dunnocks and pipits and ostriches and cassowaries and grebes and divers and cranes and egrets and sandpipers and cuckoos and parrots and waders and gulls and nightjars and cockatoos and budgerigars and petrels and fulmars and bitterns and herons and moorhens and pelicans and kestrels and cormorants, especially cormorants, and hobbies and kites and rails and eagles and bustards and corncrakes and peahens and plovers and lapwings and wrynecks and curlews and terns and doves and grouse and razorbills and parakeets and hummingbirds and wrens and magpies and jackdaws and, at a push, chickens. Let me know in a bit more detail which birds are of particular interest to you. Yours carefully, Mr. Key. Like a saint in a medieval painting, Captain Nitty bore an attribute. Saint Clement, for example, is usually shown with an anchor, Saint John Chrysostom with bees, Saint Dunstan with a hammer and tongs, and Saint Vedast with a wolf carrying a goose in its mouth. Captain Nitty was often to be seen with a handful of breadcrumbs. There are several photographs of Captain Nitty taken by the Pointytown High Street snapper F.X. Duggleby, in all but one of which his attribute or emblem is present and correct. Captain Nitty holds out his open palm piled with breadcrumbs, as if proffering them to the viewer. The exception is the picture of Captain Nitty pretending to fly. He is wearing a pair of wings made out of corrugated cardboard, satin and tat, and gazing into the middle distance with a look of startling stupidity. The chains with which he is attached to the ceiling of Duggleby's studio are clearly visible, despite the photographer's efforts to bleach them out with bleach. Reading this, I'm suddenly reminded that I think I read this only a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to carry on in any case. There are two different stories given as to the origin of Captain Nitty's traditional association with a handful of breadcrumbs. The first is that our hero was regularly sent on manoeuvres to a municipal park where insurgents bent on toppling the regime were said to use the flower beds with their dazzling splurges of lupins and hollyhocks as places of concealment. Anent the flower beds was a pond in which teal, mergansers, pintails and swans were rife. Soft-hearted and by some accounts soft-brained, Captain Nitty liked to feed the ducks and swans by scattering breadcrumbs upon the surface of the waters. After the regime was toppled, he took much of the blame, distracted by ducks, in the words of the official charge sheet. Unlike a saint in a medieval painting, Captain Nitty was not martyred unless one considers a sentence of several months' potato peeling duty a martyrdom. The other story is vastly more complicated and impossible to summarise. Readers would do better to study the 7-volume novel sequence Game of Breadcrumbs, making notes all the while in the margins. Those of you without the patience or ability to read can instead watch the television adaptation, which has won a mantelpiece's worth of awards, including the Silver Bauble for Best Swan and the F.X. Duggleby Memorial Pot for Most Innovative Use of Bleach. And I did read that only a couple of weeks ago, certainly within the last month, for which I apologise, But, sometimes I have to repeat myself because, well, anyway, it was read a bit differently, and you've enjoyed it anyway, I hope. Yeah, as John pointed out, it was a remix or a cover version. Can the original artist do a cover version of their own work?
They can do an
alternate version. That's what that just was. It was an alternate version of something I did recently. Anyway, speaking of Captain Nitty, one bright, grim morning, Captain Nitty was walking along an imposing and expansive boulevard when one of his lungs collapsed. Oof! He gasped before crumpling in an untidy angular heap upon the paving slabs. As he fell, his captainy cap fell off his head and, landing on its brim, rolled into the gutter, where it was worried by a stray dog. The dog had strayed from its owner, who was known to Captain Nitty, though the dog was not. Captain Nitty had what is known as dog blindness, in that he could never perceive any dog with any of his 5 senses. So even had he had his wits about him, rather than being sprawled gasping on the pavement, he would not have been aware of the dog gnawing and pawing his cap. Later, in a bed on a ward in the clinic to where he had been ferried by a rickety and inefficient ambulance, Captain Nitty asked the clinic chaplain, who was sitting at his bedside telling the 7 last words from the cross on his rosary beads, where his cap was. The chaplain replied in Latin, a language with which Captain Nitty was unfamiliar. What he said was, "Do not interrupt me with questions about your cap when I am praying for the salvation of your immortal soul through the words of Christ in his last extremity." But in Latin. Meanwhile, the dog had carried the cap in its mouth away from the boulevard to a patch of gorse and scrub over by the viaduct. Here it lost interest in the cap and deposited it in a puddle. Then it scampered off to frighten some tiny tots gathered around a spooky, fathomless, inky black pond. Captain Nitty made a miraculous recovery, and that very same day, at around tea time, was back on his feet. He discharged himself from the clinic and went in search of his cap. Does it bring tears to your eyes, the thought of him, bareheaded and desperate, looking in all the wrong places, plagued by invisible dogs, day after grim, bright day, fruitlessly? It should. Finally this week, or at least I think finally, here's an extract from Captain Nitty's diary from 1954. Last night it was my turn on duty for the nocturnal pig watch. Brandishing my alpenstock, I set out across the Tarputa as night came crashing down. Some say it is an affectation of mine to use a Swiss stick designed for mountainous terrain when crossing the flat, wild, bleak, desolate, windswept Tarputa. Perhaps it is, but I never leave home without my alpenstock these days. Some say also, why are there no twilights anymore, no dusks? And it is true that nowadays day turns to night in a seeming instant. I cannot account for this, so I do not try to. Conjecture would prove fruitless, I fear, and would make no difference. The fact is, as I grasped hold of my alpenstock and opened the door, there was daylight, and when I stepped out, and as I pulled the door shut behind me, so it was night. Night. The time when night. The time when we must keep watch for pigs. It has not always been so. Years ago, if you can believe it, there was not even a nocturnal pig observatory on the Tarputa. Apparently, people used to just turn down the lights in their huts and chalets and lie down in their beds and sleep untroubled sleep. It is hard to credit, is it not? Yet it was so. Where the nocturnal pig observatory now stands, a triumph of filigree in cement, as it has been described, was nothing more than a stretch of flat, wild, bleak, desolate, windswept Tarputa, identical to the flat, wild, bleak, desolate, windswept Tarputa surrounding it on all sides, as far as the eye can bear to see. Hammering on the door with my alpenstock, I summoned the duty pig observer whose shift was at an end. He handed me the cap and the dockets and flips and flaps and scrippies, unfurled his umbrella and headed out across the night-black Tarputa. I settled myself at the console and adjusted the pig scanner. There was a pong from the oil heater, but at least I was warm. Outside the wind was howling and the stars were quivering in the heavens. I thought of Beer Pint's poem Wobbly Stars. And so I gazed, now at the monitors, now out through the reinforced plexiglass pig-proof window. I saw no pigs. It was a small mercy. But we must snatch at small mercies and coddle them close and cherish them. For not all nights are pigless on the flat, wild, bleak, desolate, windswept Tarputa. And that's all we have time for this week. There will probably be more about swans and even more about Captain Nitty next week. Those of you who've been who keep an eye on the Hooting Yard website will have noticed that it hasn't been updated for about 2 months. I'm not sure entirely why this is. Possibly sheer indolence, possibly a vacancy between my ears. But I'm hoping to get it cracking again very shortly. So do keep an eye on it. And you can always visit and read years and years worth of archives in any case. And yeah, that's it for this week. I'll be here again next week. Bye-bye.
Life's like that, isn't it? Only the other day I was walking in the West End and suddenly I was set upon by hordes of fans and admirers who wanted to touch my clothes. So I took sanctuary in a nearby cinema. Normally, of course, I don't go in, but that day I saw something that really moved me. I'd like to share this wonderful experience with you. It was the sound of music.
You're listening to Resonance 104.4 FM, London's premier radio art station.